We're being recorded. We'll start right in.
Your conference is being recorded.
So hello and welcome. Today, we're going to do a introduction and refresh of the predictive index. I think kind of rounding out the year, sometimes this is a really good thing to kind of retouch on, especially for those of you who are newer to it, or those of you that use the tool a lot but aren't always so keen on how do I explain this to other people. So this is going to be really helpful here. So our agenda is we're going to just cover what is predictive index. We're going to cover what does a predictive index behavioral assessment measure. So we've got a couple different assessments. We've got the behavioral assessment, the cognitive assessment, the job assessment. We also have a selling skills assessment. We mainly focus on the behavioral assessment, so that's what we're going to do here today. Then I'm going to go through how to read that behavioral report, and we'll go actually through what the sigmas are, where do we start, what's high, what's low, and then we're actually going to take a brief look at each of the 4 factors and what they mean. And then we're going to talk about some best uses and best practices of how this stuff can be used at your company. And then again, I'll stop the recording and we'll have time for open questions. All right, so starting in here, what is predictive index? And what, more importantly, sometimes isn't predictive index? We hear a lot, and just on a call yesterday, I heard someone refer to it as a personality test. I know it's hard to kind of let go of old languages, but it's not a personality test. It's really hard to test someone's personality. There's so much more that goes into that. And the word test implies kind of pass-fail, or there's a way to do it wrong. We like to use the term behavioral assessment. So predictive index for the behavioral assessment is a tool that identifies a person's drives, needs, and behaviors. So what do we do with these drives, needs, and behaviors? Here. If you've ever been through a training, especially a training with me, you know drives, needs, behaviors, right? These are the 3 basic things that we end up looking at to get all of that great information that you can use. So the drives, Predictive Index has narrowed it down to 4 base drives that they think has an impact of predictability on work. We're going to go through each of those 4 drives in depth shortly here. So those 4 drives have been identified. Now remember, everybody has some level of that drive. Now depending on whether you have a higher than average or a lower than average amount of that drive, that's going to indicate what a person's needs are. And that's going to let us know whether there's someone that needs direction or autonomy, right? Just as one example. Then how much or how little of that drive, right? Kind of where you are on that spectrum, how far away from that middle point you go, that's going to start to give us some predictive behaviors. So now I may have the need for autonomy, but I might just need it a little bit, or that's really all I'm about. And understanding the difference of someone who needs a little bit of autonomy versus someone who needs to be fully left alone to do it themselves. That can be very helpful in how to motivate them, how to manage them, how to work with them. So that's how the drives connect to the needs and the needs connect to the behavior. So let's take a look at that kind of through the lens of our behavioral pattern here. So I'm sure each of you have seen one of these before. So when we're describing this, we kind of look at it through, I break it down into each of the three graphs, right? So if you remember when you took the Predictive Index Behavioral Assessment, you were only asked two questions. And the first question was loosely worded, what do others expect of me? So that data is represented in that center graph there, the self-concept. This can change over time. So what we're seeing here is being measured is our ability to adapt to our current situation. It's kind of what we think we need to do right now, and it's the adaptive behaviors that we've learned. So given that our situations will change, our skill sets will change, what we've learned over time will change, this self-concept graph will change over time. So if you get a new boss, get a new job, move into a new group, have anything significant like that, that's definitely going to change. The second question you were asked on the assessment was, and how do I see myself? That information is captured in the top graph, the self graph. Now this one doesn't change over time. By the time you're in your early to mid 20s, we are who we are. Our preferences are set. Now, as we've just discussed, we can still learn adaptive behaviors. So we're not stuck in this is who I am. But our preferences are set. Our preferred ways of doing things, our kind of comfort zone, if you will, is already set by our early to mid 20s. Now, this is also what we come back to during times of stress and pressure. So we've all learned those adaptive behaviors, and they're a little easier to do and to execute when things are going smoothly. But when it comes down to that stress or that pressurized moment, we tend to snap back into what is most natural for us, and that's that self. So we've covered the self-concept, the center one, the self, which is the top. So that synthesis down there on the bottom, that is simply the spatial average of the two graphs. There's really not much, I don't want to say there's not much that you can get from that, because there certainly is, but there's not a lot of reason to use that graph. That little E down there is a fifth factor that we don't get into much. If you want to know more about that, please shoot me an email. That just lets you know a little bit more about whether you use subjective or objective data when it comes time to make decisions. But really what we look at is that self graph. That's the number one. So sometimes we get questions of like, wait, which one am I supposed to be looking at here, or what do I take into consideration? Especially for hiring, we don't know anything about what the person's situation is for the self-concept to be of real value. The self-concept can be of real value if it's an employee that's taken it, and then you can see kind of what adjustments they're making, and that can be a conversation. But really, the self-graph is the one that we focus on most. So that's what we're going to kind of work with today. Those little M scores there, the M with the bar, and I apologize, this is an older version of the graph. They look a little bit different now. The M is at the bottom. Same concept, though. That's simply how many words they chose on each of the questions. So this person here chose 56 words on the first question, 64 on the second, for a total of 120. And there are 86 adjectives on both questions, and they're the exact same adjectives. All right. So things to remember about all of the behavioral patterns, and we can't stress this enough because we hear it a lot. There is no pattern that is good or bad. There is no pattern that can indicate if someone is crazy. There's no pattern that can indicate, any of those kind of things. Each drive comes with its own strengths and challenges. I kind of look at it as it's the double-edged sword. There are things that get us where we're going, and there are the same things that can hold us back at times. So understanding both sides, the strengths and the challenges of each drive and inherent in each pattern is the important part. But there is no good or bad pattern. And really important, especially for those of you who introduce this to your companies or who introduce it to new employees as they're being onboarded, very important to stress that it measures just one aspect of a person. As I mentioned in the opening, it's not about personality, and it's certainly not a test. This is one sliver of some predictive behaviors. So basically, we just get to know you a little faster so that we can help you do the best that you can. But your values, your experience, all of that add to who a person is as well. So good things to remember, especially if you're introducing this to new folks. Okay, here we go. The 4 drives. Again, so any of you, I know there's a couple in here that have taken trainings with me. You guys know that I would throw away these 4 words if I could, right? The dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality. The one thing I request is that just don't get stuck on the word. We're going to do a little bit of a surface dive into what each of these mean that might help you a little bit more. But when we speak of dominance here, we're speaking of the need to influence on people and events. When we talk about extroversion, it's the need to connect and have social interaction. Remember, all humans have that. When we're talking about patience, we're really talking about the need for consistency and stability or variety. And when we're talking about formality, we're talking about the need for rules and structure or lack thereof. So really kind of looking at these more about what they're defined as rather than just those simple words there. The other part of this that's really important to remember is that intensity matters. So I mentioned earlier about whether, someone has the need for autonomy, right? And if it's someone who's got a little bit, I like to do things on my own versus I'm an incredibly independent person and I have to have my stamp on it all. The way we know that is through the intensity. So when we read these graphs,
The leader has disconnected. The conference will be terminated in 5 minutes.
what? Everybody else still there?
I'm here.
Maybe we just lost Larissa. Hello, you guys. I'm so sorry. This is the technical difficulties I thought we were having. Okay, jump right back in. Intensity matters. So when we're talking through, when we're looking at these graphs, we start at the center point. There's that little arrow at the bottom and the 0 at the top. So that's what we call, that's the statistical average. If I have any other statistics nerds in here, it's the empirical rule, right? That bell curve. So our languaging, if it's between -1 and the +1, and those are sigmas, by the way, we measure in sigma, we call that a moderate expression. 68% of the population falls within that place. So most folks will find the majority of their drives kind of in that area. As we move out in towards the second sigma, we call that a very expression. So the B in this case, that's going to have a pretty significant expression. 95% of the population fits within that positive or from the +2 to the -2 sigma. So when we get into that third section there, into the extreme, those are where it comes a little bit harder to adapt, right? Just a little bit harder to move that across the line. So the closer you are to that center line, the more adaptive the behavior will be. So as we go through the 4 drives here, if you have a drive that's close to that 0 line, you're going to look at it and say, yeah, well, sometimes I'm that way, but sometimes I'm this way. And that's absolutely true because we measure on a continuum. So you sometimes will feel this way and sometimes will feel that way. Now, if you are something like our bottom graph here, and you've got that C that's all the way over, see that little arrow that's pushing it off the chart? On this chart, we measure 99.7% of the population. So there is a part of the population that goes right off of that chart. That will be felt very, very strongly. Yep, and harder to move. So when we describe these, you're going to be like, yep, that's me to a T all the way. So just understanding that there can be 2 graphs that have, or 2 patterns that have the same shape, but when we bring the intensity in, they may have the same base need, but how they go about expressing it is going to be very different. So just remember about that intensity matters. All right, so next up here, we've got dominance. So this is the need to influence. So when we're looking at the high and the low, right? So anything to the right of that midpoint is what we call high. Anything to the left is what we call low. And all that means is a higher than average or lower than average expression of it. So on the high side, how this comes out is confident, independent, assertive, decisive, and my favorite one here is outspoken. We get a lot of confusion sometimes that outspoken goes with that extroversion. People with high dominance can be pretty talkative. They're really firm in their opinions, and they're really okay sharing them. They're pretty confident in what they have to say. This is also where that sort of autonomy comes in. They're independent. They like to do things, and they like to have a stamp on them. They like to influence things. With a lower level of dominance, helpful, accommodating, supportive, team first for sure, and they welcome some guidance. So this is really more of the team-focused person, less independent in the fact that they want to know, okay, so what's our team mission? I'm ready to go. What do I need to do to make sure the team wins? Whereas high side is going to be a little bit more competitive individualistically. What do I need to do to make sure I win? So still can both be pretty competitive, but for very different reasons. And just understanding that it's, again, on that continuum, the closer to the middle you are, it could be, yeah, pretty confident, but I can also kind of sit back and let someone else drive. Or if I'm all the way over to the right, I'm driving this ship. Get on board, right? Pretty assertive there. Lower side, again, towards the middle, I'm helpful. I'm approachable. I like to make sure that, everyone's happy and harmonious. If I go all the way to the left, I might be so nice that, I'm just very, very, very accommodating. All right, so that's the dominance there. Extroversion is the driver need to connect to others. So naturally, the high side, we've got connects easily. They're open communicators. And not only are they open, but they're relational communicators. So just remember that they really look at things through the lens of relationship. They sometimes can get energy from others, but here's the tricky thing is, I wish I had changed that. Not going to lie, I forgot that was in there. Myers-Briggs kind of screwed this up for everybody. You can actually have a high level of extroversion on our scale and still be somewhat of an introvert. You still need to kind of recoup after you've been around people for a while. So that's a pretty common thing here as well. But one of the big things extroversion is for us is that talk to think. So these people are external processors. They're kind of talking their ideas out loud. They're spitballing ideas. Something comes to them, they kind of get up and they go talk around with other people. they're socialized learners. They learn socially. So it's really important to them to have the opportunity to be able to speak out their ideas. If you wouldn't mind just muting your line, you are being recorded, and I would love if you could just mute your line.
Yeah, and Nick said kind of that you had told him we needed another something, a piece of something. This is what I brought.
I'm just going to mute everyone.
The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press #6.
So with a lower level of extroversion, more analytical, we've got task focus rather than that relational focus. They have a very sincere style of communication, and that's due to the fact that they think to talk. So with this, it's really more about kind of needing time to noodle it over, to think it through before they come forward with an idea. And they're definitely more reserved. This takes more time for them to connect, but every single human being needs to connect. It's just whether I do it quickly and openly, or I'm a little bit more reserved and discerning with who I share with. Okay, so patience, high patience is our steady, even, relaxed. They're very consistent because this is the need for consistency and stability, right? This is, I have the ability to focus in on a task or project, work it from start to finish, and really like approaching things that way. I tend to be a good listener, and I'm quite thoughtful because I'm approaching things from a slower, more even, relaxed place. Now, the flip side of that, however, is because I like things that way, when things do get a little bit heated and intense, I might not be such a great listener or so relaxed and even. It might kind of cause a little bit of upset there. But given everything being even, that's my preferred way of doing it. So low patience here, this is a big need for variety. Now, these people can be pretty intense or tense. They're fast-paced. They're moving a mile a minute. They have a really high sense of urgency. They jump into action quickly. And they can shift and pivot from one thing to the next quite easily. The downside of that, however, is that they can be pretty easily distracted. And they put a lot of heat and drive behind things. So that's sort of that, the engine that drives things forward. They also like stress and pressure. They kind of thrive under pressurized situations. So they may create that and push it to those around them. And then finally, formality. So high side, we've got the disciplined, prepared, careful. They follow the rules and they follow through on things because this is the need for rules and structure. On the lower side, I can tend to be more casual, a little more flexible. I like working in the gray and in the ambiguous. I really am looking for results over the structure or how we get there. And I can sometimes have a creative approach because I'm not stuck in how we've always done it or being beholden to the rules. What's interesting about this is it's a little bit of an indicator for our details as well. Everyone can have a focus on details. So when you say I'm a detail-oriented person, what's interesting about that is some people's detail orientation is only on what's important to them, and for some people it's on all of the details. So understanding which one of those you are will probably where your formality lies on your graph. That'll let you know. High formality are black and white, detailed facts. Low side, ambiguous, I pay attention to the details that are important to my mission. So that is a quick right through all of the factors there. So I put together a few of the best practices here for hiring, inspiring, and team building, because these are sort of the three big areas in which predictive index tools are used. So in the hiring, the one thing, and this is for whatever tool you use, be consistent. So whenever you choose to insert the assessments into your hiring process, just make sure that every candidate gets it at the exact same point. this is really, really important, and you'll all be receiving a video next week about the new process of creating jobs. We're actually going to record one and send it out to you because it's this important. Always, always, always use a job target when you're hiring. You really shouldn't be hiring without using a job target. It's just really that important. So we're going to send out a video on how to do that. And just remembering that the predictive index data is only one part of the puzzle. So understanding that even if they're a perfect fit for that job pattern, you know, they may not be the right fit. And to help determine that too is that you've got us here. If you're hiring people and you want to discuss a candidate on whether they're a good fit through the predictive index lens, shoot us an email, pick up the phone and call. We genuinely love to talk about that kind of stuff. When we're looking at it for inspiring, one of the best practices is, and especially if you're more old, accustomed to the old system, in the old system it was like one person had the access and that was it. It's just not the way anymore. We have ways to make sure that people have access to only what they need to be having access to. But there are so many tools in the system that we really believe in giving access to the system to your managers. That's included with transparency throughout your organization. These shouldn't be hidden from people. They're not secret. They're self-reported. It's kind of who people are. We all know it anyway. It just gives you really concrete tools to be able to discuss it. But on top of that, training and support is key for people using the tools. The overview that I did today, I'm happy to do almost exactly this for your teams and for your organizations. We do this a lot to introduce PI into organizations or into teams. That's included with your license. That's not one of our extra, fee trainings. That's just, quick half hour to an hour. And sorry, I'm trying to speed through here in the interest of time. Finally, with team building, it's a really great tool to introduce to people to kind of let them start to ask questions about each other. So having everybody have their pattern, understand their pattern a bit, and then starting to work with teams, it lets the teams have a common language to be able to ask really smart questions of each other. There's also great tools in the system, the group analytics and the team builder, that give you so much information, whether you're building a team or your team is built and you're trying to figure out how to support them. So reach out to your consultant or to me or to Amy, and we can kind of walk you through some of the exercises that you can use these tools in the system to do some teamwork in your company, or you can have us come in and do it either way. So I'm going to stop the recording now. I know we're right at 12:30, so thank you so much, but stay on the line for live questions.